All right. Our next topic is going to be the American Revolution. We previously discussed the Declaration of Independence and all of those events that led up to the American Revolution. Now, keep in mind the Declaration of Independence is not only just a Declaration of Independence where our grievances are listed, everything that we really kind of feel is wrong about this relationship between Great Britain and the United and American colonies, I should say. But it's also a declaration of war. All right. But keep in mind, the Declaration of Independence was written in 1776 and adopted in 1776. But the clashes really begin, especially in terms of gunfire, that begins in 1775. All right. And so let's go take a look a little bit closer at the American Revolution. Now, as we lead up to the American Revolution, each side has their advantages and disadvantages. In a very general way, I'll go over one quick advantage for each side, and those same advantages will be disadvantages for the others when you really think about it. We'll talk about more in class, though. Great Britain has the advantage of having sheer power. They're the most powerful country in the world. That means that they have the resources needed to potentially maintain their power. And an advantage of the Americans is that they are fighting this war on their land, right? They're the ones that live in the colonies. They are very familiar with the terrain. They're very familiar with the landscape, and that's going to help them utilize things such as, guerrilla warfare and stuff like that. Now, if we're looking at the disadvantage of Great Britain, then their disadvantage would be their unfamiliarity with the land and with the terrain. And the Americans' disadvantage is going to be a lack of resources, right? Because they are taking on the most powerful country in the world. So they're going to have to figure out what they can do to subsist and also what potential alliances they can form. Now, here on the map, you see loyalist strongholds in the red areas. You notice that New York is kind of a center for a lot of loyalists, and if you're a loyalist, that means you're loyal to the crown, loyal to Great Britain, loyal to King George III. All right. Now, in the green there, we see the patriot strongholds. All right. In the purple, those are contested areas, people that are essentially either mostly undecided, to be completely honest with you, or there's a large mix in that area. And you can see the Native Americans. The Native Americans are either going to be loyalists or they're going to be neutral. A lot of them will be loyalists because they feel as though they'll get a better deal from the British than they would from the American colonists. Mainly because, remember, it was the British that adopted that proclamation line of 1763, and so the Indians believe that their land will be protected, at least to an extent, by Great Britain if Great Britain wins this war. Also, during this time, you'll see a lot of slaves decide that they're going to take a side in this war, and they are going to side and be spies for Great Britain, and they are promised freedom if Great Britain wins this war. And if you notice, up here, up at the top of the map, Nova Scotia, that's a loyalist stronghold. When the war is over, a lot of those slaves are transported, I should say, from the American colonies to Nova Scotia, and that's where they will move because for their own safety, essentially, with hopes that they will be free. And there's a really good book about that, and there's also a very good TV series about that recently aired. It aired last year. Now, George Washington has some problems as he's commanding the Continental Army. First of all, only one-third of the colonists actually want independence. It's a common misconception that most of the colonists wanted independence. That's absolutely false. Only about one-third of them want independence. The other third want to remain loyal to the crown, so they're loyalists. And the last third are neutral. Right? They're not taking a side. They're kind of apathetic and stuff like that. Now, another problem that Washington has are these colonial loyalties. What that means is that a colonist would be, if a colonist is from South Carolina, they are more loyal to South Carolina than they are to America, right? And so there's like this sense of identity, like how I'm always talking about Florida being, the greatest state in the country. Just this sense of identity and loyalty to your state or to your colony over, this kind of idea of unity on a national level, right, and unifying the 13 colonies. And so that's something that Washington's going to have to combat as he's getting these uh, troops together, these poorly trained troops, which I'll talk more about in a bit. Washington's also going to lack a lot of resources, and he cannot tax the people in order to raise money for the army. All right, so they're going to have to get creative and hopefully form some kind of alliance in order to make sure that the troops have the materials and the resources that they need. And also, the troops are very poorly trained. I mean, they will be poorly trained until the arrival of von Steuben. Like I said before, we have this idea of George Washington, this heroification, this Disneyification of George Washington being, this great military leader, and he was a good military leader. I don't want to take anything away from him, but he certainly was not as good as he's been made out to be. And he gets a lot of credit for things, and he has gotten a lot of credit for things that he simply should not get credit for. Uh, our troops were very poorly trained, and it's von Steuben that is going to whip our troops into shape. And I'll tell you a little bit about von Steuben, and maybe you'll be able to figure out why, for the most part, most Americans don't really know about him. Von Steuben was he was from Prussia, which would be modern day Germany, and he had been a military leader then. And he was known for his strategy. He was absolutely incredible. But the problem was he was kicked out of the military in Prussia because he was homosexual. And so Ben Franklin finds out about von Steuben, and he goes over. He's over in Europe, and he recruits von Steuben to come to the colonies and fight for the American cause. All right. And so he comes over. Von Steuben decides to come over, and it's von Steuben that is going to work with George Washington. He's going to go to Valley Forge, and it is specifically von Steuben who is going to whip the American troops into shape at Valley Forge. At Valley Forge, so many troops are near death. They don't have the equipment that they need. They're very sick, and it's going to be von Steuben's very strict discipline and training that's going to prepare them for battle. George Washington is incapable of doing that. George Washington is basically sitting on the sidelines while von Steuben is leading these men and training them. And so von Steuben is essentially going to save the American cause by better training our American troops. All right. And so when you think about that, right, and think about this idea that Benjamin Franklin went over to Europe, got a guy who was homosexual, and had him come over to America to save the American cause. And then you think about our history of treatment, right, of certain groups, particularly in the military. It was just a few years ago where don't ask, don't tell, the military policy was struck down, or repealed, I should say, by President Obama, right? And so here we were within our lifetime. It was not allowed for someone in the military to serve and be openly gay for so long. For most of my life, that was not allowed. And yet, if you go back to the American Revolution, well, who saved the American cause? A homosexual from Prussia who was recruited by Benjamin Franklin. Right? And so this is the significance of understanding our history, right? And especially when it comes to marginalized groups. Military strategies between the Americans and the British are going to be very different. The American side, like I said before, they're using a lot of guerrilla tactics, jumping out of bushes, very kind of unorthodox war. We consider it kind of Indian style warfare. And Americans are also going to attempt to make an alliance with the British enemy, right? And so they're working very, very hard to try to form an alliance with the British enemy. And remember what I said about France in the French and Indian War. Remember they lost all that land, and it was looking real sad. And that map from 1763 was looking real, real bad for France. But I said the French would be back, all right? And now the Americans are going to try to form an alliance with France so that they can hopefully have some victory in this war. Now, the British strategy, they want to split the colonies between the North and the South. They want to basically split them right down the middle. They want to block the ports to prevent any resources from coming in from an ally. They don't know who their allies are, but they want to make sure that no European country is helping the colonists. And there, quite honestly, there just aren't a whole lot of European countries that like Great Britain at the time. They're also going to use the loyalists to divide and conquer. They want to use the loyalists to kind of disrupt the American Revolution. They want to use the loyalists as spies, and also to kind of draw these, kind of put these wedges between communities, and hopefully change some of those people who are neutral into becoming loyalists. A major battle takes place at Bunker Hill in 1775. And while the colonists lose this battle, it is significant because the British suffer an enormous loss. They suffer about 40% of casualties, right? And so Great Britain thought this was going to be a really simple war. Surely the colonists don't stand a chance against them. But for both sides, it's really seen, even though the colonists lose, it's really seen as a victory in some ways, because the Americans realize they actually have a chance, and the British realize they have to start taking these colonists seriously, or they're actually going to lose this war. In 1776, New York City burns. And there are millions and millions and millions of dollars of damage. To this day, we have no idea who started this fire. But New York, if you remember that map, New York was kind of a center for the Loyalists, right? And so it is possible that some patriots started this fire. We know the type of stuff that the patriots would do, especially the Sons of Liberty, which actually started in New York City. But we know what they would do, right? Like you saw the tarring and the feathering. And so it's possible that the Patriots started this fire. It's also possible that maybe the Loyalists started it themselves. But this is going to result in uh, this disruption in New York, and Great Britain trying to come in and really take control over New York and use, this kind of martial law and authoritarian, even more authoritarian leadership. And it's going to make things very, very difficult for them in terms of trying to manage New York City and also fighting this war. And you also have to keep in mind they want to hold on to New York because that is the center of the Loyalists. So it's more symbolic. Very, very famous painting here of George Washington and his men crossing the Delaware on Christmas Day, 1777. And they go across this Delaware, across the river, and they sneak attack the Hessians. And the Hessians are German mercenaries. A mercenary is someone who is paid to fight, and so Great Britain has so much money they can actually hire soldiers to fight for them. And so they hire these soldiers from Germany to fight in the American Revolution. And the German mercenaries are asleep. Surely they're not expecting an attack on Christmas Day, but George Washington and his men sneak across that Delaware and they stage an attack. Here's a painting from Valley Forge, and you can see, the frigid weather. You can see that the men are kind of in low spirits, and that is George Washington standing with von Steuben. And remember, von Steuben, that is the man I told you about earlier, who was a Prussian military leader recruited by Benjamin Franklin. The Battle at Saratoga, that's in New York in 1777. This is a Patriot victory, and the significance of the Battle of Saratoga is that it was a much needed victory. The Patriots knew that they needed this victory, and when they're able to defeat Great Britain in New York, that kind of wakes France up and convinces France that maybe they should get involved. Maybe the colonists actually have a chance here. And so France will begin to send aid to the American colonies. The Battle of Yorktown is the last major battle of the American Revolution. Uh, it's at this battle where Cornwallis will uh, he'll basically be surrounded. If you look at this map here, all right, you can see the location at which Cornwallis surrenders. And so what you have are not only are the American troops involved here, but also you have France getting involved here. What you don't see on this map or this diagram in terms of where the different sides are fighting and the angles at which they're coming in is you don't see Lafayette. Now Cornwallis is right here indicated in the blue, right? Um, and he is going to be held up by Marquis de Lafayette, and he's the namesake in of a town in Louisiana. Lafayette is a French military leader. He's considered actually an American hero. He is going to basically trail Cornwallis and make sure that he gets slowed down, and try to kind of put these speed bumps up in a way and keep Cornwallis on his toes. And because he slows Cornwallis down, that allows other French forces, along with Washington's men, to surround Cornwallis and make him surrender. All right. And so without Lafayette, there is no victory really at the Battle of Yorktown. And Lafayette is so critically important to American history that every year on the anniversary of Yorktown, and also on the anniversary every time we celebrate the 4th of July, there is a special gift that is sent from the United States over to France in order to honor the work that Lafayette did. He's seen as an American hero and an American legend. And I just told you that really long story that it's really cool information to have if you have to write an essay or something on your AP exam. But yeah, they're probably not going to have any like multiple choice questions about that. Sorry, y'all. So why exactly did the British lose? Why exactly did the British lose? Um, we could think about many things whenever it comes to the problems with the war. One of the big reasons the British lost is they went in overconfident, and they also went in such a way that they just didn't expect that there would be this reality of an alliance between the colonies and anybody. They knew it was possible, but they didn't expect it, right? And they didn't foresee that it would be France. They thought that they had decisively defeated France, and France came back and got them in the end. Now, there is another Treaty of Paris that is going to end this war, and that this time it's the Treaty of Paris in 1783. Now, our last Treaty of Paris was 1763. That was the treaty that ended the French and Indian War. This is the treaty that ends the American Revolution. All right, and you can see here a map of America as a result of the Treaty of Paris. So here you see British North America, right here, which is basically Canada. Right now we have the United States, which includes the 13 colonies, as well as this kind of Midwestern territory, Michigan and all of that. And you still see that Louisiana belongs to the Spanish, and now Florida has gone back to Spain as well. All right, remember England had taken Florida? Well, now Florida is back to Spain. And then there's still some disputed area out west. And look at Russia that made a come up. Now Russia got all of Alaska. The Articles of Confederation. These are going to be rolled out during the American Revolution. But this is going to be essentially our first governing document of the United States. So the United States is born during the American Revolution. And as the country is born, we need something to govern us. Right? And so while this is our governing document, there are some weaknesses, some significant weaknesses to the Articles of Confederation. One of the weaknesses is that it has a unicameral legislature. What that means is that just think a unicameral versus a bicameral. Uni is one, so there's just one house of the legislature, right? So just one house in Congress, right? What we have today is a bicameral legislature, which means there are two houses in Congress. We have the House of Representatives and we have the U.S. Senate. Both of those houses make up Congress. Well, under the Articles, there's just one house, right? And so in order to pass a law, you have to have 9 out of the 13 colonies vote to pass a law. You need all 13 colonies to vote in favor of an amendment, right? To amend a law or to amend some document such as the Articles of Confederation. So that means you have to have 100% of the people agree to that. You also have the issues of the representatives of the legislature being very absent on a regular basis. People are just not taking this idea of national government very seriously. A lot of that has to do with like we talked about before, those state and colonial loyalties over that of a national cause. Also, they can't tax. The articles does not allow them to tax. There's no federal tax. They can't raise armies. And so if the United States were to go to war with another country, what that means is that each state would then decide whether or not they want to send their troops. And so let's say it was 9/11 happened and George Bush decided he wants to invade Afghanistan. If we were under the Articles of Confederation, then each state would then have to declare war on Afghanistan instead of George Bush making his case and then Congress deciding to declare war. All right, so that's a significant difference. We'd have to wait for every single state to declare war and, as a result, send their men because the United States doesn't have a standing army at that time. We have a continental army during the American Revolution, but that's just an army that exists during the war. The United States has no standing army during this time. Also, under the Articles, there's no executive branch, which means president. So there's no president, and there's also no judicial branch, and that would be like the Supreme Court or any court system. Now, under the Articles, there is the Land Ordinance of 1785 that's passed, and so what that does is it allows the Congress to raise money through through the sale of land. So that land out west, they're going to basically use a geographer's measure to chop up this land and sell it by section or by acre. All right, and they're going to do that in order to raise money for the Congress and for the small federal government because they cannot tax. Now, one of the key things that we kept from the Articles of Confederation, it was really the only thing that we kept from the Articles of Confederation. That's the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. All right, and the most important thing about this is that it laid out the plans for how a territory or a land would become a state. And so essentially, we got rid of everything from the Articles of Confederation except for this. All right. And again, because it was actually a really good plan for us to kind of create these guidelines and figure out how a territory reaches the path towards statehood. And so you see that the judges are appointed. There have to be these population requirements. The most important thing here I have highlighted this idea that when the population reaches 60,000, they can elect delegates to a state constitutional convention. And that's the key thing towards statehood is developing the state constitutional convention. And you can see here, it's a Northwest ordinance because it really deals with those Northwest territories. Remember when we looked at that map of America from 1783, and I pointed out that we had added all of this land, all of that stuff that was like these Midwestern territories like Michigan. These are the Northwestern territories. And so we have that land, but those lands are not states. They're simply territories, and they're going to use these guidelines in the Northwest Ordinance in order to become states once they meet the population requirements. Now, what's really interesting is Thomas Jefferson's kids. Eventually, they are going to, and when I say his kids, I'm talking about his kids with his slave, Sally Hemings. Eventually, they're going to actually move to these Northwest territories that are not states so that they can live freely. And some of them are going to live as black men, and others will live as white men. Again, here's the United States, this time in 1787. You can see here the Midwestern area or the Northwest territories. Here's Fort Detroit. That was the location in 1763 that Pontiac was attacking. And you can see here in the red these settled areas. Now, anything that's considered a frontier means that they're still kind of exploring those areas. All right. Also, if you look further west, you see the Louisiana Territory, and it says here on the map that Spanish is going to cede this Louisiana Territory to France around the year 1800. There's going to be a treaty, an agreement that's reached between Spain and France. Is for France to get the Louisiana Territory back, and that's going to be important in our period 4. Shays Rebellion. Shays Rebellion is actually one of my favorite topics, especially when it gets around election season. And so essentially, to give it like in layman's terms, there's a man by the name of Daniel Shays. Obviously, he's the namesake for Shays Rebellion, and he's located in western Massachusetts. And him and some other farmers are very frustrated because they fought in this American Revolution. They wanted independence, yet they don't have the lives that they thought that they would have. They're angry because they're in an enormous amount of debt. They're also angry about taxes that they face at the state level. And so they form this rebellion. And so what this does is it kind of wakes up the government. It wakes up George Washington. It wakes up Thomas Jefferson. And it wakes up all of our founding fathers to say, we need a stronger federal government, because under the Articles of Confederation, the states have all the power. And the reason they did that, the reason the states have all the power, is because they don't want a strong central government, because they just got rid of a strong central government. They just rebelled against a strong central government, and that would be the king, right? That's going to be the monarchy. And so that's why the articles were set up the way that they were. They didn't want an executive. They didn't want the central government to have the power to tax or to raise an army, because they thought the government would become oppressive. All right, they wanted the states to have all the power. Now, George Washington and the founding fathers are realizing, well, if you don't have a strong central government, then what happens when you have all of these rebellions? And so George Washington would say, there could be no stronger evidence of the want of energy in our government than these disorders. We need energy in our government, and the way that we get energy in our government is to completely rethink the way that we've been doing government. All right, and so they're going to go back to the drawing table and figure out what they can do about this political issue. So that's going to wrap it up for this presentation. What I'm going to do in the next video will be covering how our founding fathers addressed this issue of Shays Rebellion and this issue of a weak central government. And that will be the U.S. Constitution.